Welcome to Poets and Thinkers, the podcast where we explore the future of humanistic business leadership. I'm your host, Ben, and today I'm speaking with Andy Allen. Andy's the co-founder of the software company Not Boring, a 2-times Apple Design Award winner, and former co-founder of the startup FiftyThree, makers of the award-winning paper app and pencil stylus. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Washington School of Art, and his work has been featured in The Verge, Bloomberg, and The Washington Post. Growing up in a remote Alaskan fishing village with no roads in or out, Andy learned resourcefulness early, starting his first business as a 14-year-old DJ because the town needed someone to throw parties. That spirit of making what's needed with what you have has defined his entire career. Fast forward, Andy and I met over 12 years ago when I got to visit the FiftyThree office in Soho after falling in love with their then newly released app called Paper. Little did we know then how many parallels our lives and careers would have, but more on that in the episode. In a time where software creation happens at immense speeds with the push of a button or writing of a prompt, AI slop is everywhere, from LinkedIn posts and websites to apps and even causing Amazon outages. I wanted to have a conversation with Andy because he has taken a very different approach to software building. With a focus on playful, game-like aesthetics, his studio creates beautiful applications that make an emotional impression. And they honor part of our human nature, like joy and beauty, that have gotten lost in the midst of optimizing design systems for automation and generative AI. We speak about the fleeting nature of modern software making, analogies to fast fashion and fast food, as well as Andy's article, or better poem, titled For the Culture, that touches on the responsibility we carry as product makers beyond the functionality of our tools and the business case for our companies. All right, let's get into the episode. And if you like the show, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this podcast. Andy, where does this podcast find you?
I am at home in my home studio in Seattle, Washington.
And for those of our listeners and viewers that don't know you, can you give us a little bit of a summary of who you are, what you do, and what drives you?
Yeah, I can, if you like, I can start back at the beginning.
Sure.
I grew up in a small town, a little fishing village, really, in Southwest Alaska, a little place called Bethel, and very small, very isolated. You know, no roads lead there. You had to fly in, so very, very kind of isolated. And this is, in the 80s, 90s. This is pre-internet. Didn't have cable TV, didn't have all these conveniences. So it was somewhat kind of shut off from the outside world for quite a while, almost for most of my childhood. And it's funny because, looking back, I really appreciate it a lot more now. When you're a teenager, wherever you grow up, you hate it, right?
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that kind of moment now to just explore things. And I think, I grew up in this environment of a lot of resourcefulness. It's really hard to get stuff in. And you just didn't have a lot of stuff around you, So if you wanted to see something happen, you had to do it, right?
Right.
There wasn't, if your piano broke or something, let's say, there wasn't a piano repairman in town, right? It's very basic services there. So you had to learn how to do everything, and loved that kind of resourcefulness. Actually, my first business started. I started as a DJ because, the town needed someone to throw parties.
Yeah.
And so I started throwing some parties for people, in high school. And, I was 14 years old and started my first business then. So it's funny, but yeah, in hindsight, it really kind of, it built up a sort of resilience and a resourcefulness that I found to be really transferable now into starting a business and a startup and technology and all that. So that's where it started from the beginning. But I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker and really got into film and started on that path, and then sort of discovered design in college at the University of Washington and just found really a love for design. I always loved technology and loved using computers to make interesting things. And design just kind of scratched that itch for me really well. And I loved the kind of process of design, I think, as well. Like it really taught a very sort of unique approach to thinking about solving problems and solving them in a fairly like expressive way. And so, was trained in the traditional graphic design sensibilities,
Yeah, same here.
my instructors were sort of like second generation. They were taught by like all the folks from Europe and the Bauhaus who left
Hmm.
post
Yeah,
or during the war, right? And they were then passing that on to me. So it was a very like very
yeah,
strict, like international Swiss typographic style,
yeah,
like we'd hang our posters up on the wall and the teacher would come by and like rip down the bad ones and like, all right, right. Like let's just talk about these three. These are the three that are acceptable to talk about. So it's very much that sort of environment I grew up in. Always just I don't know, I just had like an interest in storytelling and more interactive media. And so kind of quickly pushed a little bit further in that direction and joined an agency right out of school as like one of their first like interaction designers. They were just starting, this was like mid 2000s, like 2006. And that was when like interaction design was just now starting to become a thing and agencies were starting to kind of wield it as another tool. So
hmm
it was an agency in Portland called Zeba, and which was traditionally like an industrial design agency, but they were adding interaction design. And I just learned a ton. I mean, I learned like how to code there, how to like build applications out of Flash, it was Flash based applications, but
yes,
like build installation work, like projection work, and like just got to do all sorts of fun stuff there. But very quickly kind of like realized, I remember very clearly the moment this hit me. Whenever you work at an agency and you realize that you need to go the next step, for me it was
yeah,
like we spent a year developing, doing all the research and developing the designs, user testing the designs to develop like a book of like design specs that we handed off to a printer manufacturer.
hmm
And then I very clearly remember seeing that printer on the store shelf, at a Best Buy or something, right? Months and months later. And uh, it was different, it wasn't quite the same. Right?
yeah,
And I think one reaction is like, they effed it up, right? But the other one is like, well, I immediately thought like they must have hit something, right? There must have been some constraint that I didn't know about, right? Or some
yeah,
limitation. So at that moment, I knew I needed to go to where software was built, right? And where is the biggest software in the world built? It's built at Microsoft, right?
hmm
I never thought I'd work at Microsoft, but I ended up there working on some Skunkworks projects. And then one of them was like a 2-screen tablet sort of creative expression sort of tool called the Courier. This was like pre iPad, so there wasn't really a tablet world at the time. And met some great people there. And some of those people, when that project was canceled, we left Microsoft and decided to start our own thing. And that thing was a company called 53. And our focus was around building creative tools for mobile users. We made an app called Paper, which is like a sort of digital sketchbook for the iPad. And we made the first like stylus. It was like top selling stylus called a pencil. This was before the Apple Pencil. Apple may have gotten a little bit of inspiration from some of the work that we did there. But we had a great time doing that. And eventually we were acquired by WeTransfer. I worked with WeTransfer for a while as in sort of a head of design role there. And then just started feeling that itch again to get out and explore, what design can do in software. And that's really led me to what I'm doing now, which is not boring software, making playful software for your everyday sort of boring routines.
yeah. And we will get into that in a second because I have a lot of questions. But what's also fascinating for me listening to going through your history, there's so many overlaps. While I didn't grow up in a town that didn't have any roads, I also grew up in a very small town, 5,000 people. And, a lot of what you described in terms of how that feels growing up there in the 80s and 90s very much so resonates. And I was basically halfway around the world in Germany, close to the French border, experiencing that. And my path through graphic design, agency, very, very similar into the software world. And funnily enough, I've also found myself say the line of, I would have never imagined myself working at Microsoft
Yeah. Yeah.
as well. And, funnily enough, which I didn't know when we first met, I would end up working with some of the folks that you used to work with
That's right.
at Microsoft. So there's a lot of really interesting overlap, which is always fascinating and great how this works. So maybe it's a good segue into my first question that I had for you. We first met actually I did some research 12 years ago, went through my camera roll because I remember taking some photos back in the days, actually in the Soho office of 53. You co-founded a company. You had released paper, which I thought at the time when it came out, it was one of the best, and probably still to this day, one of the best pieces of software made in this touch era. Basically, I still hold any drawing software to
Mm-hmm.
the standard that you set with specifically the pencil texture
Mm-hmm.
in paper. I think there's nothing out there, not even the stuff that you get in Procreate, that ever has reached the pencil texture of paper. And at that visit, you also showed me and gave me the pencil, which, for those people that are not familiar with, maybe I'll find a photo and put it in the show notes. It wasn't just a stylus; it was also just so well made. Because, as you said, there was no stylus at the time. Jobs were very vehemently against styluses for a very long time. You also made it in a beautiful form factor.
Mm-hmm.
The almost, carpenter pencil shape, that the walnut, I got the walnut, wooden version, which was just so beautiful to just hold and
Mm-hmm.
kind of fiddle with.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the work that you did, all of you did there, was absolutely groundbreaking. I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on what happened to software over the last 10-ish years since you started paper, and how you see the state of software today, because I think it is a great way for us to then talk about some of the other questions that I have.
Yeah, it's I have thought a lot about that and written a little bit about it. And yeah, I think it's in many ways software, the way that we design it, the way that we build it, it's grown up, right? Like it went from something of a niche profession or a niche thing that some people did into something that like is now the dominant like vertical of design is working in digital mediums, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not, it didn't used to be that way. It was sort of a
No.
niche thing. And sort of the weird kind of outcast folks like us tended to gravitate towards it, right? But nobody really understood it or knew how to talk about it. They just knew that like, okay, this website made us money, right? And so we had to figure it out. And we were like trying to, especially if you have like a more sort of traditional design background, like you're trying to figure out how to get these very constrained spaces, like a website pre, HTML5 and or pre CSS, right? How do you get that
Mm-hmm.
to follow any like interesting design principles, right? Very
Yeah.
difficult. And so, but it's grown up a lot. The tools have gotten a lot better. There's a lot more people in it. And I think it's in many ways it's the success story of software, right? Like we have that, that age old saying that software is going to eat the world, right? Like it's we're there now, right? It's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The problem though that I see now is that we've gone like too far the other way where everything had to be very like handcrafted. Everything now is very automated, right? And very
Yeah.
systematized. And there are certainly advantages to that. And I think that's great. Like you can automate anything, right? Like we can, automate the manufacturing of clothing or of like foods, right? And there's certainly big businesses to be built on that. And I don't fault them. I mean, there's a market for that. There's probably an appetite for that kind of thing. The thing with software design that I saw happening over the last, 5-6 years that really spurred the development of Not Boring and some of the ideas behind it was that there wasn't really anyone like doing the interesting thing, like
Mm-hmm.
pushing on how do we make software just a better experience or more interesting or taking it to the next level, right? All the conversations, especially a few years ago, were around like design systems and
Yeah.
design automation and things like that. And that's all fine, but I felt like we were missing that, And if you look at other design fields, there is that, right? Like if you look at the world of fashion design, it's not like if you go to a fashion design conference, like not everybody's talking about like the right sort of like manufacturing line to use.
Yes. Yep.
You have like visionaries who think about like, well, how can the aesthetics of fashion move forward? And how can we, that sort of thing. There's fashion
Mm-hmm.
shows, right? And I think critically, the people, well, here's a key thing too that I know you'll relate to. I started teaching at the time. I started teaching about 7 years ago in sort of the middle of all this. And it became very clear here. I like came into the classroom thinking like, hey, I'm from the industry. Let me show you how it's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me like, slap you with a bit of reality. Like that's not going to perform well like that. That sign up flows like dead in the water for this reason, right? And there was some of that, sure, some slapping around. But really they, the students taught me something, which is they just had this, they hadn't yet hit that, right? And they
Yeah.
had this real kind of like innocent optimism about what
Mm-hmm.
design can be and how you can push design forward, through these mediums. And it just really got me excited again. I just started to like, wait a minute, yeah, why did I get into design in the first place, right? Why?
Right.
I think I like to be a designer. Like, I don't necessarily want to just become a manager or a business person. I actually like being a designer, and I like making things and designing things and creating things. And, it just got me to see that differently and look at these other fields in design and think like, why don't we have that in software? You know? And why isn't there something that these students, they're looking up to, like fashion design students are looking up to the great fashion designers, of history and of today.
Mm-hmm.
In software, who are we looking up to? Right? There wasn't really great work to look up to. We're mostly looking up to like business leaders, right? Or billionaires, right? It's like, I'm not sure that that should be the only like measure of success, and I think
Yeah.
I just felt like that was missing. And so in large
Mm-hmm.
part, this was, not boring, and some of the ideas around where I hope software design can go, was just shaped by all that.
Yeah, it's a great, I think, observation. I share a lot of this, including the inspiration that I get from working with students, and you get very easily, over the last 10-15 years being in the tech industry, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing the narrative of the efficiency, the automation, and all of that. And that starting to really guide most of your work. And so I think your observation is spot on. What I'm hoping to bring some new perspective with this podcast around is exactly that, and how we also, I think, from a business leadership perspective, if we all are automating and reproducing the same kind of stuff that's predictable, then there's also no edge anymore for a business. There's no value creation happening. And so I think it's trying to find both inspiration but also, I guess, some call to action for, hey, in other industries we see this as necessary. It is how things evolve, is how we push things forward. And there is a business impact, but that is not the predominant reason necessarily to do it in the first place. And I have some questions for you around that, because I know you've also been publishing and writing
Yeah.
on that quite a
Well,
bit.
can I build on that a little bit? Which is that,
Yeah.
I think there is, yeah, it's not, I think exactly that. I think it is, can you practice design in such a way that business is not necessarily like the number one objective? This is kind of like a hot take or like a controversial thing to say sometimes, which is like good business is not the same as good design,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to like to have an objective that moves beyond, that isn't solely about business. And I think that's, again, I feel like every other creative discipline would understand that. Filmmakers would get that. Like they don't, a lot of filmmakers, like they want to win an Oscar way more than they want to be, some like director of a big blockbuster hit or something, right?
Yeah.
And I want to instill that sort of like motivation, and I want to find that because I think software is ready for it, and I think you talked about, it's not that you push the business aside. I think there actually is a business opportunity in the space because
Yeah.
it's very, we think about design as one thing, but really it's different things, right? And you can use it in different ways. And especially in technology, you can think about design serving different purposes based on like the maturity of a technology, right? Like if you think about the adoption curve of a technology, right? Very
Mm-hmm.
early on, like design is almost there just to make it work, and like in many ways get out of the way, like think about
Yeah.
Mid Journey using Discord as their UI, right? Like,
Yeah.
but the idea was to get very much out of the way to like allow for flexibility to figure out what this technology can do. And then there's like
Yeah.
a scale point, right? When that curve really like ramps up. This is where like Apple is great. They can take an early technology that's kind of figured out, but they can figure out how to package it and like
Mm-hmm.
universalize it in a way that makes it approachable for everyone. But then the
Yeah.
thing that we often like we kind of focus on those two phases in technology. There is a third phase, which is like it's a mature technology now or a mature category. And what design needs to do in that phase is it needs to differentiate, right? Like it's already
Yeah.
saturated and design, I would argue that that's where design is best, and traditionally where design has done its best work is in trying to differentiate from a brand perspective and from like a philosophical perspective, like how is product A different from B or why is A better than B? You can use design to help shape that. And that's, no surprise, that's what we do at Not Boring, right? Is we literally
Yeah.
take products, like product categories that are well saturated. There's way too many weather apps already. Nobody needs to make another weather app, but that makes it the perfect thing to use, the perfect, like, pure kind of platform on which to express some ideas about what design can be, the same way that an industrial designer will design a chair. Like, there's plenty of chairs. Chairs have been around forever. We don't need another
Mm-hmm.
chair necessarily, but it's a great way to express, this moment that we are at in design today. How can I express that through something that you already know, right?
Yes, it reminds me a lot of, when we were building Wunderlist over 10 years ago, there was over 100 to-do list apps
Mhm.
in the market. And we by far did not have the biggest feature set by far. In fact, with every version, we actually cut down actual functionality and focused on the things that really made a big difference. And to this day, when I run into people, and end up talking about that part of the work that I got to do, the one of the first things people mention is the wood background, and then the ding that, the sound that the app made when you checked something off. And it's exactly those kind of things that differentiated it. It speaks to the emotional impact of design, which I think has a huge impact, obviously, in how we choose the products that we surround ourselves with and that we allow in our lives. And it also shows the impact that you just outlined, more on a higher level of differentiating in the market. And the other thing that really resonated with me, which I want to dive into because it's something that's very top of mind for me, is you mentioned earlier, you were taught by folks that basically came from the Bauhaus, line of the craft, and it was the same for me. And when you look at the Bauhaus and how when it was created, and really at kind of the birth of the Industrial Revolution and the self understanding of designers that came out of that school of thought and the practice, it is the combination of making products that can fit into this industrialized world, but also have a clear self understanding of this is not just in service of the business; it's in service of society or humanity or however far you want to push it. But there is a self understanding of we have to and we should continuously push the boundaries
Mhm.
because and it reminds me of something you published for the culture. It was the article. It's almost like it's more a poem than it is an
Mhm.
article. But maybe it's a good way for us to talk a little bit more about that because I feel like all the dots are connecting around that. And it's a very different self understanding of design and designer and maybe even a business as a whole, and how we fit into the world.
Yeah. So yeah, the kind of impetus for that article was some of these same thoughts. And I think I didn't really have a good, because I didn't really have a good response to that question of like, okay, well, what is it, like if you're not doing it for the business, what is it for, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seemed obvious, but I needed to articulate it. And for me, it was, oh, it's for the culture. And it was actually having a conversation with someone who just pointed out, someone who'd like, who'd had startups and been very successful. And I think going through that cycle myself of like, VC funded startup acquisitions, doing all that. And you just realize that like, I don't know, this stuff comes and goes, right? Like it's
Yeah.
so it's so ephemeral, like, your valuation is going to mean nothing in like
Yeah.
3 years, right? It's going to mean nothing. And it means everything at the time or when you don't know. Cause again, you mentioned this sort of script or this narrative that I think is just prevalent in the tech industry. Um, and it's, about like, the way that you become successful, right? And you just sort of go through that on autopilot because you don't know anything else, right? Honestly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's really the story that is out there. And so you think that's the one that you have to follow. And anyways, it just got me to think that like, yeah, all this stuff doesn't matters. And honestly, I found that the stuff that does matter is like what you said about paper. The fact that you think it was impactful in the sort of touch software space, right? Like honestly, that's the stuff that lasts, right? Like
Yeah.
53 is gone now, and like paper it's still around, thankfully, it's still holding on. But who knows how much longer, right? And our pencil is gone. Like all these products, all these things that we make, they're gone now. And really the only thing that survives is that impact, is that like ripple that we can make in culture. And,
Mm-hmm.
I've come to a point where like that's the most important thing to me now. And even though Not
Yeah.
Boring is a business and we put out apps that we're very proud of and I love having this as an outlet, honestly, like all the companies I built and the products I built has sort of been vehicles for a message of some kind, Even
Yeah.
53 was like a vehicle for this hope that like, technology can serve like human creativity, right? And serve that
Mm-hmm.
primarily. Not Boring software is really about how we can just see software differently. And maybe we can like put this idea of, you know, us as people and like, software's impact on us and its impact on culture at the forefront rather than business. I would love to see like, on the front of, I don't know, whatever news outlet, The Verge or something. I don't know. Everything's very tech focused and very business oriented, but like I would love to see like, design heroes on there, right? Who are doing like really interesting work in software rather than just people who are, you know, building interesting businesses, which is fine. But what about all the interesting software designers and all the interesting work happening in software? I think that's,
Yeah.
just as, if not more impactful, honestly.
Yeah, well, which I mean, at the end of the day, it does ask the question of what goes good is a business for, right? If it does not advance something bigger than itself, and that's a big question that I'm pondering. Certainly, I agree with you. Every time I run into someone and they mention how they love using Wunderlist to do the shopping
Hmm.
list with their partner or getting ready for a college move, and how they love the app. That's the satisfying
Exactly. Yeah.
hard. And I've always said this to my teams is, the things we made, the half life of software is somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Same with venture backed companies, right? But it's how we make it and who we make it with that really is the determining factor for me, certainly. And I love hearing you describe that in a really well articulated way, which is sort of a great way to talk a little bit more about, how you are applying all of this thinking in your work. And your apps have won the Apple Design Award. You've been featured, on The Verge, Bloomberg, Washington Post, I found as well. So, by all standards, that is some measurement of success in a lot of ways, actually, aside from the fact that you're actually selling your software and there's a business behind it. But then when I go into your website, your company's, I guess, purpose, and I quote this playful software for life's boring routines. Most apps help you save time. We help you savor it. And I love that last part because I feel like going all the way back to the very beginning of what you said about how we're so bought into the efficiency goal as the end all be
Hmm.
all of automating the process, building software that automates our life, all of that. And underlying what you're describing here is a very different understanding of what this is all about. And it's actually about
Mhm.
savoring the time that you spend. So, talk to me a little bit about that very different focus from most of the other software companies, big or small. And you already sort of talked about why it's important to you, but how does that apply in the work that you do, the products you pick or the spaces you pick, the problems you want to solve, and then how you actually get it into your work?
Yeah, I think it's well, first of all, I'll say that that perspective, I don't think I could have had that perspective in my 20s, so I do think, I'm 40 now, 40 plus, I'll say. And
Yeah, same
so
here.
I think some of that is just, reaching a certain point in your life where, I sort of say it with trend, or I think it's true with like fashion and trends, like once you see a
Hmm.
trend kind of come back around the next time, you're like, oh, okay, that's how it works, right? Like, and you're kind of like ready to step off the train a little bit, and you're like, and then, you just look like an aging dad, I guess. But I think there's a great perspective that comes with aging, which is that like ability to just kind of slow down and like kind of reevaluate the sort of narrative that you've been running through, on something, somewhat on autopilot, right? Like you've just sort of been
Hmm.
following a narrative that you thought was sort of the way that things go, but once you go through that and you reach the end point, you're like, I'm not really any happier. It's like,
That's right.
okay, now you got to figure out what you're really about and what you really care about, and that's where the fun starts for me, honestly, because you get to like redefine it and kind of like shape your own narrative.
Agreed.
And some of my favorite, creative heroes have done just that, whether that's like Miyazaki or Brian Eno, like people who've managed
Hmm.
to stay very creative very late in life and still do very
Yeah.
interesting work, but are like, very uniquely their own, right? That would sort of be my dream. So I'm sort of on that path to, I'm like trying to become someone like that. Like that would be the dream goal, right? And in some ways, I wish those were our, more of our heroes rather than the billionaires of these companies who just
Yeah,
seem
I'm with
miserable
you.
to me. I don't know.
Terrible. Yeah,
They don't even seem
100%.
happy, right?
Suck.
I don't know why everybody wants to be, Elon Musk or someone else. They just seem miserable. But anyways, I'm getting a little bit off track. Yeah. So that's, that kind of shaped how I see, where I want to take things. But you wanted me to talk about how we build around that, right? Like how we actually build our products.
Yeah, because I think in a lot of ways you are really in pretty much in all regards, as I've been following you and the work that you do, really from the first app you released and even the process that you document, everything almost goes against the grain, which makes a ton of sense given what you've already talked about. But I would love to learn a little bit, also just hopefully to inspire folks to at least take a different approach into account because you're clearly very successful in a lot of dimensions, probably more than the very narrow efficiency focused one. So I would love to learn a little bit more about how do you do it? How do you apply this philosophy that you outline on the website? Your very small studio, I think up until recently it was just you, really.
Yeah.
And how do you do all of that?
There's two of us. It's always been two of us, actually.
Okay.
My partner's just a little bit more behind the scenes, but he worked with me at 53 and we've worked for a long time together. Yeah, I mean, I would say honestly, like it started, we just started playing around. We just started playing with ideas, and some of these were just ideas that had been percolating for a while. Like, how does a business come about? It's hard to say sometimes, right? Like you probably
Mm-hmm.
know, like they kind of sometimes just like, it's like dust particles like forming in the
Mm-hmm.
ether, to like form these stars or something, right? It's like just these different ideas start floating together. And then you just start like, oh, let me like play with that for a little bit and see what happens. It was never intended to be a business, right? But the more things started to come together and we started to like love working together, that's when I started to get very intentional about, okay, how do we make a business that we want to work in, because my
Mm-hmm.
partner, he'd gone through two acquisitions, right? And he's kind of been through the same cycle. And, both of us sat down and we were like, like we could try and go on this path or, really our favorite time at any company, and I've been through like, the small scale company until you scale it up to big, and then working at much larger companies. And it was like our favorite time was when it was just, you and your co-founder, like sitting around a kitchen table,
Mm-hmm.
just jamming on something, right? And just making stuff. And we were like, well, maybe we can just do that. The tools are already getting better. And if we just try and extrapolate a little bit of where they're going, it's probably going to be more likely that you can do more as a
Yeah.
single or double, very tiny company like this. And so we thought, like, let's just stay small and let's build everything around that, right? Like, and now how do we like focus on the things that we enjoy doing? Because I've done everything, right? Like I've run product teams, and I've been the person who lives in Mixpanel, watching the
Mm-hmm.
metrics and figuring out how we get this one to go up a little more and that one, that sort of thing. And I just don't love that. It's not me. No
Yeah.
surprise.
Same here.
And so we very intentionally did some things like we don't do any tracking. I mean, it's a great benefit for users because there's like zero data and it's very privacy
Yeah.
focused. But really, a lot of it's for us because if we don't add the data, there's nothing to optimize, right? Like we can't spend weeks or months, right? Like trying to tune our onboarding sequence or our like paywall exactly right, right? And so did a few things like that we embraced early on to kind of like put limitations up, but they were limitations that would keep us and sort of focus us to do the work that we wanted to do. Another one was we were only going to build, the idea was around basically, well, okay, I'll spell out. We haven't really said this publicly, right? But like the roadmap. You want to know the roadmap for not boring software?
Absolutely. Especially if it's a world exclusive from
Exclusive here.
poets and thinkers.
It's the iPhone 1 home screen, right? Like literally, we're just remaking the apps on there, right? Like it's the weather app, it's calculator, it's
Love that.
timer, it's a camera app. There's a bunch of other things that we can still get to. But why? Because those are like universal pieces of software that are still defaults today, and that's
Mm-hmm.
been what, 17, 18 years since iPhone 1, right?
Yeah.
And you
Wild.
can find a lot of those same apps on, the Palm OS or on the Apple Newton
Yeah.
from, 1993 or whenever it came out, right? And like, it's just something universal about these needs. We need to know the weather, we need to do calculations, yada, yada, right? Like, and it sort of doesn't matter. Like, those will take different forms even in an AI era,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's like, it's just
Yeah.
stuff that we feel like we need to know or need to have at hand. And so we thought, well, let's just remake very basic, simple daily use apps like this. Let's not try and reinvent anything. Like, we know people have a need here. Let's like take that off our plate. I mean, you've been at startups yourself, and anyone who's been at a startup, just how much time you waste thinking like, is this really a problem? Like, what's the real
Mm-hmm.
problem here? We got to talk to more
Yeah.
users. Is this the right set of user? Is this the right persona? And is this really a problem for them? Like, if you just take something that exists, if you just make it better than anybody else has ever made it, then you can win that category, right? Like, I mean,
The very Apple-like approach. They've perfected that understanding of, the human factors of the really critical everyday needs and
exactly.
problems we run
Yeah.
into.
And then I think, and then we thought, well, let's do something that, Apple, it's a great point because Apple has already done their version, right? And they've made kind of the standard default version. So now we thought, well, in order for us to like to move you know, any bits of software and have any progress there, like we have to do something completely different. We can't just do the standard weather app, right? Like we have to approach it very differently. And so we chose a category that's very like by default people get for free. So it was in
Mhm.
many ways a thought experiment just to see like, will people even pay for purely
Yeah,
the design of software because they get it for free, right? So we knew that people were paying
that's
for
right.
it. There was something that they were valuing in our approach to it, right? And so we very explicitly chose those types of apps and those categories to tackle. And then the other thing is like we've said that we're not really planning to make like a weather 2.0 or something, right? Like what we put out there, we'll keep evolving it and refining it,
Mhm.
but we're not going to like start adding in all these new features and adding more things on top and on top, right?
Right.
That's never been the goal. So, in many ways, we've set us up to build a suite of tools, right? And so that's why we have 6 apps now. We just released a camera app. And our goal is to
Hmm.
basically release an app like roughly every year. And again, that we've found that both from a business perspective, like that's a better use of our time than, fiddling away on trying to like tune the knobs on our optimization,
Yeah.
which maybe I'm just bad at, but like I've never gotten like, you never see like great gains out of like trying to optimize your onboarding flow. It's like minor gains, right? At least at our
Hmm.
scale, and like it's worth it if you're at Meta or something like that and you can get 0.01% more people to click on something. I'm sure that's probably worth someone's salary. But like at our
Hmm.
scale, it's better for us from a business standpoint to just make something new, right? Make a new app.
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah.
motivates us to do the sort of work that we want to do, which is not this like, V2 add stuff on top of it, which honestly a lot of that was some learnings from paper because we kind of messed up paper by doing that, I think.
Yeah.
And thankfully like stripped it back and got it kind of back to its original essence a little bit, So yeah, so it very intentionally set up like, a handful of things to define what the business should be, but they were all guided by, how do we want to work? How does it motivate us to do the
Mm.
type of work that we want and the type of work that we think is going to have some sort of cultural impact, hopefully.
Yeah, that's hugely inspiring. A lot of it resonates very deeply with, outside of the big companies, I had a chance to build and design software. And I do believe on a very deeply human level, which I think you see in the way people respond to your products, resonates with us because, to borrow your company name, no one really loves boring software. People just as humans emotionally, no one wants to use it, and you see it in the enterprise context as much as you see it in the consumer space. And yet we've all sort of accepted that to a certain degree, and certainly built a lot of software companies
Mhm.
around that idea. So it brings me to an additional question, sort of a follow-up, because now, with the rise of generative AI on the code side, on the design side, even, a lot of the, I guess, kind of negative approaches in the sense of, hey, let's just automate even more generic design systems to generate even more generic, user interfaces and even apps, because now everyone can build an app. A lot of that is seemingly being perpetuated. On the flip side, this technology also enables entirely new multimodal experiences. Really interesting use cases can now be built on the phone, glasses, this and that. So there's this really massive tension that comes with the technology. How do you see your approach either scale here, or does it break because we're now basically at the fast fashion cycle of, software creation before it gets before it gets better?
Yeah. I mean, I like to think, first of all, like, as you know, with 53, I mean, I've always kind of been a proponent of tools that can lower that barrier for people to make
Hmm.
stuff, right? And
Yeah.
I think, and Gen AI is doing a lot of that, right? Or generative, or coding assistants or things like that, right? Like
Mhm, mhm.
it's letting us kind of express ourselves in new ways and giving us new tools to do that kind of thing. And, I think, we always think like we're sort of the first ones to go through a certain experience. And to some extent, like, this is a little bit different, but like, but creative fields have gone through a lot of, a lot of change in the past, right? Like, I mean, just moving
Yeah,
from,
100%.
from like physical, graphic design layouts to like digital publishing was a pretty monumental change for a lot of people, and a lot of people had to adapt in different ways. Filmmakers, right? Going from like shooting on film to shooting digitally and then editing digitally. I mean, that was over a
Mhm,
fairly like tight window, like a 10-year span or something. We went from like you had to go to film school or have a lot of money to be able to shoot a short to like anybody can shoot a short film and edit it together and it looks like amazing and put it
mhm.
online and find it was like amazing how quickly that turned. And suddenly it was very democratized. And a lot of people in the film industry went through a sort of existential moment. similar to this, right? And I mean, I think it's just a lot more people are going to be able to make software, and I think that's a good thing. I think it does mean that you're going to get a lot more stuff though, right? And it means that you really do, I think, have to have a strong point of view and a strong voice and something interesting to say to connect with people, right? And my hope is that that we're able to kind of champion that and help that type of software rise to the top and can get to this place where we can have very interesting people making interesting software out there in the world. Because I know it's like, and I fall into the same trap. We all want to believe that, like, the next device is going to like get us to get off our devices and reconnect with the real world,
Mhm.
right? Like every new, whether it's like, remember when they were pitching like the smartwatch as like,
I do.
it's going to get you off your phone, man. And it's like, now you're going to be more connected and all that. I loved one of the ads was like someone who was surfing had like a watch and like was like catching a wave and then like looked at their watch to check their heart rate or
Right.
something like that. It's like, but yeah, you're disconnected on it. So it's no, it's another screen, right? And same with like
Mhm.
all the wearables, like get ready for, they're doing it already, but like even more so. The first pitch is going to be
Yeah.
like, hey, it's going to help you reconnect with the real world and all that. I don't know. It's more screens in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's going to be, so I've embraced this idea that like, there's just going to be more software, and I think that's just going to be true. Like it's so useful. Like the truth
Mm.
is software is very useful and it's very helpful. It helps connect us. It helps us like experience new things, communicate with others. It's just such a great tool, and it has
Mm.
gone too far, or in some cases maybe it's advanced faster than we've been able to manage it or regulate it and things like that for sure. So there's a lot of problems with
Yeah.
it, but there's sort of the same problems with any new technologies, right? But I have embraced this idea that we're going to have even more software than we have today. And I just want to see a world where that software is like more attuned to us, right? And we can control it, we can manipulate it, we can decide which versions of we want, and it's not just this one default version that we all have to use.
Mhm.
And it becomes a form of our self-expression. We can modify it and alter it. It's malleable. That's kind of the world that I'm hoping can arise from some of these new tools and more people working in software.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And it's one of the kind of key reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this, because and it's probably a great way for us to kind of wrap us up. When I'm looking at your work and I'm listening to you talk now, especially this last bit that you said, underlying your work is this. I wrote down it's two core themes to me that come up, and they're interrelated. One is beauty and the other one is play. And I feel like that's sort of determining factors at the end of the day of what you're making, how you're making it. And I think underlying that is an appreciation and I guess maybe prioritization of the individual human and the person that interacts with the tools and the software that you make and their humanity, not as a user, but actually, and that maybe goes back to what you said about fashion and for the culture. So is that true? Is it a just a really kind of rude assumption on my point? And how do you think that can we scale that? Is that something that's left to the few you know studios that just have the luxury and the ability to just go do that, and the rest is basically microwaved meals, or how do you think about that?
I think for sure we can do it. I mean, we can, again, I think we just have to look at other design fields who've done it,
Mm,
and food is always a good analogy, right? Like I mean, I know there's a whole like geographic component there that's not prevalent in software. And, software does seem like particularly like susceptible to this like propensity to want to scale, right? And think about everything through scale. And I think a lot of this comes back to like, well, if you just think smaller, right? And I do think
hmm
like if you can do more with fewer people, you can be a smaller business. We're two people, right? We make six
Yeah.
apps. We manage six apps and we're making more, right? And we
Yeah.
make like some small like physical collectibles and fun things like that too, right? So we try and do a lot, and I think you can do a lot more. And then if you're a smaller team, you don't have to appeal to the whole world anymore, right? Like we don't have to appeal
Yeah.
to everyone out there. That means that you can be more opinionated. You can be more specific, right? You can speak more to a very specific audience. And, that's the world that I want to live in, really. People talk about like, you know, billion-dollar, like, I don't know, however many billion-dollar companies. I want like million-dollar, like millions of million-dollar companies rather than like $1 billion company. And that to
Yeah.
me just like creates a lot more variety of life and allows
Mm-hmm.
us to kind of figure out our own voice. Cause yeah, our voice is play. And that's what I found to be really rewarding for me, and that sort of like is where I tend to kind of like find my groove, I guess. I just love kind of playing with ideas through software
Mm-hmm.
more so than beauty. I know you mentioned beauty, and that was a big part of 53. And if you find our work beautiful, thank you.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
I have some posters of our work. That's one of
Yes.
that was one, talking about like stuff that lasts. One goal was to make software that you wouldn't feel bad hanging on your wall.
Yes. That's a beautiful kind of idea or guiding principle.
Exactly. Right. So like, can you
Yeah.
put it up on your wall and feel good about it? Like, do you love it that much? Right.
Yeah.
But I've also, the artist Richard Serra, the sculptor, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had a great response. Somebody asked him about beauty and like, how do artists think about beauty? And he had a great response, which was like, artists they're not really concerned with beauty. Beauty is almost like, he called it the residue of this sort of pursuit of like some kind of like underlying truth. Like he has these
Mm-hmm.
giant, rusting, iron metal pieces that are not
Yes.
like the most classically beautiful, right? But really, truly, beauty, the more you think about it, the more you understand that beauty is not so much an aesthetic, a sort of subjective, like aesthetic thing. It's more about like how we describe these like pursuits of honest pursuits of truth or something, right?
Yes.
Like you can, if somebody does something, you can say, oh, that's beautiful, right? It's beautiful how they did it this way or the way that they portrayed something.
Yeah, it's almost a result of a kind of manifestation of
Yeah,
integrity,
right.
right? Being true
There
to
can be
its
like a
core
beautiful act,
nature,
right,
right?
of
And
doing something very earnest and very, yeah, full of integrity and that kind of thing. And so I've tried to embrace that more than the aesthetic side. And it has kind of shaped some of what I do, because
hmm
honestly, some of the, like we've made some skins in weather that are very, again, I was trained in the Bauhaus, like very
yeah,
strict design. And that's still kind of what I sort of lean into mostly. But like I was just,
hmm
I was playing around in Blender and I was like, my kid, my young like 5-year-old was walking up. You're like, oh, you should put some eyes on that. So I'm like, okay, like let's put some like googly eyes on this number, right?
yeah,
Why not? And she's like, oh, I like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll play around with it a little bit, put some more eyes, put some teeth on. I put some
yeah,
like wild colors in there because usually I might use black or something a little bit more
hmm
designery, right? So I put some like wild colors in there. And then I'm like, well, which one do you like better? Well, of course they love the one with the rainbow colors, right? And
yeah,
so I'm like, what if I just lean into that, right? Like stop, like, just let go of some of these old notions around what good design
hmm
should look like and just try and pursue this idea of like this sort of innocent play, and just
yeah.
see what comes from that. And maybe there's beauty in that pursuit, right? And so that's if anything, that's what we've tried to pursue with this. And that's why some things are very different than others that we do. And some things are a little bit out of left field, and some things are like very colorful. And I love that stuff too. But honestly, like I run everything by my kids. And if they find it interesting and fun and are still playing with it, then I feel like there's something there. They're tapping into something that I've lost, you know?
I'm so with you. I'm currently working on a children's book for the last year and a half, and I find that there's so much wisdom in the advice we get from our children on really what makes us
Hmm.
human. And it is exactly those moments where you realize, oh wow, yeah, you've lost like a whole part of the spectrum of the human experience by growing up. And so I think that's a great reminder. And I think actually that's probably one of the best pieces of business advice that we can give is exactly that. That's fantastic. I think we're at time and I could continue the conversation. Maybe we do. I think it would be really interesting to dive deeper into some other topics. And so maybe we'll save that for another episode. Andy, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was incredibly inspiring. So thank you for
Thank you
sharing
so
all of
much
that
for
with us.
having me. I appreciate it. And such great questions. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for listening to Poets and Thinkers. If you like this episode, make sure you hit follow and subscribe to get the latest episodes wherever you listen to your podcast.